Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game Podcast with myself, Ben Scallum, and Jason Osborne. How'd you like that for a high energy start to the year, coming in
Not at
fast and
all. I,
hot?
I think viewership's going to drop by about 95% probably having
Well,
with that.
certainly the earphone users among us are probably now deceased, but that's you
And I
see.
know as well, you did a really high energy introduction to our last one before Christmas. And then afterwards, you were agonizing over saying, I don't like that. I don't like that. So I'm not really sure what got into you that you decided this is the way to go again.
Yeah, I don't know. You see, New Year, I like to come in with energy because I feel like if you start off on a low note, it's only downhill from there. So at least if I start off ridiculously high passion, then by about June, maybe then I'll have started to return to some semblance of normality. But
Very
with
good.
that said, we hope you all enjoyed your Christmases and New Year's celebrations. We hope you've all wasted gym membership, promising you're going to get back in shape. We all know that's a lie, uh, for me is included. And so I suppose we'll jump straight back into the news, and we're going to be touching on Irish news, of course. We're going to be talking about the Dublin City traffic plan. We're going to be talking about the abysmal state of children's books, which I think I, in particular, have found out in the aftermath of Christmas just how
Yeah.
far the standard has declined in that regard. And we're going to be talking about Trump's actions in Venezuela, specifically his capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife and extradition to the US. I
It's
don't
the
even
most
think it's extradition, but
bizarre way for the year to start. I mean, when I woke up and I saw the image of, I can't remember what time the image came out of Nicolas Maduro in chains on the USS Iwo however you pronounce it. I was like, yeah, this is going to be another hell of a year.
yeah, that was quite unexpected. You know, I think everybody knew that hostilities were brewing between the two
Yeah.
countries. You saw oil tankers being seized, and you saw saber rattling on both sides. And it's sort of a very unexpected and abrupt end to that, assuming it is the end. And obviously, we'll get into that in a moment. What could potentially come out of this, but you don't expect things to escalate that fast. Where, oh, by the way, the other guy is now in handcuffs out of nowhere. So, yeah, so that was obviously very dramatic. A lot of reactions to it. You have people saying that this is going to be another Iraq, that America has just made a fatal error and Trump is an idiot who's leading the country into more wars, and they're going to be bogged down in a quagmire. And, he was supposed to be the anti war president, and look at him being an imperialist monster by starting new conflicts overseas. And then you have other people who are saying that there's no reason this has to go on any more than it already has, and that the mere fact that he's been captured sort of the conflict is over essentially because he's not well liked within Venezuela, which is true. And even though basically that it was a swift and effective military operation that has ended the conflict in one fell swoop, I don't really have the expertise in geopolitics to say which one of those are true. I obviously have thoughts on the whole thing, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it, Jason, before we delve too deep into the ins and outs of what this could mean.
I find it hard to be very enthusiastic about it, which with certain, I'd say more so the centrist camp would be an unpopular take because I see everyone celebrating the removal of a dictator. And I'm not really in doubt. I do think he was a dictator. I've seen far more Venezuelans celebrating both in Venezuela and abroad. I know in sort of similar church circles, there are a couple of Venezuelans who were very happy about the development. It isn't the case that it's just Western propaganda that this guy is bad. So I do think that there's the potential for some good to come of it, but that is all soured. The word that I would really just use for the Trump administration, this second Trump administration, seems so decline of the Roman Empire. I was thinking this yesterday as I was looking at a I'm sick again, new year, new sickness. And so I was doing that well-advised strategy of looking at X in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep. And I saw the wife of the White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, his wife Kate or Katie Miller, posted an image of Greenland covered in the US flag. And she had some caption with it, but the meaning of the post was clear. And it's very, but again, she was posting this, and then I saw after that they're posting pictures of being at a dinner. They were all at one, I presume it was Mar-a-Lago. They were at this dinner, and there is just something deeply vulgar and superficial that I really, really don't like about the new Trump administration. That's having an effect on a lot of people that I previously had a lot of time for, I think. Um, I'm never a huge fan of Matt Walsh, but I think he's just spiraled into total decline uh, over the course of the past couple of months in some ways. In that he was posting about how he's as non-interventionist as it gets, and yet then he went on. The majority of his post, 90% of his post, was about why the US doing this in Venezuela was a great thing for the US. And I just think that it's, again, I think some good may come of it. I don't think Nicolas Maduro is a good guy, and I think there's a lot of happy Venezuelans, and that's a good thing. But this story is far from complete, and I think a lot of people are acting as though it's a done deal and there's no more left of the story, and I think that is just extremely foolish. I think there's a real, like, short-sightedness with the Trump administration that, like, by not just with the Trump administration, I would say with America more broadly, that it isn't just a Trump administration thing, but they really treat the world as though America's always going to be on top. And it's so clear. Any student of history will tell you, even poor students like myself, that isn't the case. And I think that they're sort of vulgarizing the world and ushering in a new world order once again, for want of a better way of putting it. That has some pros, but it has a lot of cons. There's a lot more we can get into, but those are just my initial impressions. I'm also at the point that I'm really debating muting the words Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela on X because it's just like everywhere.
Well, I'm gonna disagree with you, and I'm gonna push back a bit on this because, as I say, I'm not an expert, and so I'm just gonna play devil's advocate for the sake of argument and present what Matt Walsh and people like him would say if they were here, which is that
Yeah.
he would say, and he has said, that there is no contradiction in saying you oppose pointless, endless wars in, for example, the Middle East, but you do support an intervention like this, given that Iraq and Afghanistan and all of these different conflicts were decades long in boots on the ground endeavors that lasted an eternity. The goal was things like nation building. We want to try and bring democracy to tribes, people who aren't interested in it, never asked for it, don't want it. And it's this kind of moral crusade and so on. And it's halfway across the world. And that is a disaster. Conversely, toppling a hostile dictator who is facilitating drug cartels and other organizations who are damaging your country in material ways, that's in your hemisphere, right in your own back garden, and doing it in about 5 minutes, where it doesn't turn into this long, protracted, insanely costly war, which for the time being, obviously it's extremely early days. We'll see how it turns out. But for the time being, it seems to have been a success in the short term. He would say that's a totally different thing, and that he has no problem with wars that are in America's vicinity for the direct benefit of the country from a national perspective. I understand that. I don't know what you would say in response to that argument.
Well, I would say that, that's all well and good, but, and again, I think it's a complicated thing. I saw John posted the weekend saying that many things can be true at once about this, and I think he's exactly right, that there are pros to it and there are cons to it. But I feel as though amongst the Trump camp, there is, and more so the MAGA camp, I guess, the cons are being completely airbrushed, and I think, say, Matt Walsh is someone who's engaging in this. I'm not making this a big Matt Walsh targeting thing, but I just think he sort of symbolizes kind of what I'm talking about here, because he's always been going on about non-interventionism, and like we can say, okay, it's different, it's not a nation building thing, but it's kind of like it is a nation building, but by a different name, because the moral pretext for the action was obviously capturing Maduro, which again I think was one of the good things. I know there's a lot of debates going on about international law and things like this, but that's really complicated, first of all, and a lot of people making the case that obviously well, you need someone to enforce international law for it to sort of be effective. And that could be what they were doing here. But I think more so, no sooner had they done it, they've done the press conference and they're talking about oil. And they're talking about how they're clearing the space for the American oil companies to come in.
Yeah, but I don't think they would deny that or have denied that. I think that's one of the key differences here is that previous conflicts, they make it about some kind of high-minded ideal like
Mm.
democracy or freedom or we have to do whatever. Whereas Trump and his administration, if they were here, what they would say is, no, yeah, we want resources. I mean, first of all, again, I'm not an expert in these things, but people who are,
Mm.
who know more about these things than most, who are analysts in this specific area, are saying that Venezuela, being one of the biggest oil producing nations in the world, by America seizing much of that oil, it will cause the
That's
price of oil globally to crash, which will totally screw over Russia. Apparently, they're panicking in the Kremlin right now because Russia's economy is so energy dependent, and all different adversaries of the US are going to be in serious trouble now. That could easily bring an end to the war in Ukraine because if Russia's economy tanks, they won't have the resources to continue fighting. That's what people are saying.
mm.
So people are saying for that, from that perspective, it's a masterstroke. So my point is, and Maduro, it's not like Trump is toppling him just because he's a bad guy, he's a meanie, and he hurts. Like there's lots of
I
world
will
leaders
say
who are
there's
bad
so many
guys who.
conflicting reports in the middle of this, and one of the funniest ones I saw was the claim that Trump was sort of tipped over the edge by all of the footage of Maduro dancing like Trump, and he's like, "That's
Yeah,
time to go in." But anyway, your point.
I doubt that very much. Although that would be
Yeah, no, me
funny,
too.
but yeah, I think the point is Trump. If you were to put that directly to him and say, oh, this is just about oil and this is just about this and that, I think him and his administration would say, yeah, you're right. Like I'm an American nationalist. I want my country to succeed. This guy is a hostile socialist who is like a lot of people don't understand that Venezuela has kind of set itself up as the Dubai of crime
Mm.
insofar as they have all these deals with like Mexican drug cartels and foreign criminal organizations where they say you can do business within Venezuela, you won't be arrested, you don't have to keep looking over your shoulder for intervention from the authorities as long as we get a cut. And so these guys are going there facilitating like human trafficking and drug trafficking and all kinds of crazy stuff, um, which obviously directly hurts America and Americans. So all of this again, like I need to reiterate, I'm not really weighing in on this one way or the other because it is such a nuanced conversation
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
not really my business. But I think it's important to articulate the other side, and it's good to have a back and forth
Well,
on these things and
no, I
consider all of the.
agree. I agree, and I wouldn't actually dispute anything that you've said there. It's just it's important to acknowledge that's coming from, and this is really unpopular these days, certainly on X, which is that people treat the sort of aspirational politics of the past 30 years or so with complete and utter disdain, and understandably so, because it was pure moral posturing a lot of the time, while in the background there were a lot of shady doings going on and whatnot. Whereas, but I think sort of there were, again, I'm not saying that that was a perfect model or anything like that, but I feel as though we moved into an era that is becoming more unashamed about espousing a sort of might is right approach to that. And I kind of do come from a Catholic perspective, which is that no, might isn't right. Might can do things, and that's certainly what happened here. The military operation was unbelievable. It was so professional. It was really impressive, and every guy kind of has an amoral dream to do something like that. I feel watching a highly competent team of guys go in, lose no one, do exactly what they were trained to do, and extract them. They were gone in minutes. It's so impressive. But that doesn't change the fact that, as I say, part of the difficulty of evaluating this is that it remains to be seen how it'll play out. It very much seems there's sort of debate over whether this was a negotiated action or not. Some people believe that Maduro did. Some of the reports say that Maduro agreed to be extracted essentially, and that the U.S. administration was in talks with various Venezuelan opposition parties to sort of establish something fairly quickly. But that all remains to be seen. The military is still in play over there. It seems like there are a lot of armed groups still in play over there, and there's still very much the potential for it to descend into a mess. And I don't think people are ridiculous for being concerned that that is what's going to take place, because that has frequently taken place after the US has intervened in places, no matter what their stated intentions were.
Well, I mean, as a counter argument to that, after Trump bombed Iran, everybody had a screaming heart attack. Again, with some justification. I don't want to act like that's a ridiculous reaction to have, but people freaked out and went, "Oh my gosh, this is it! World, he's about to go to war with Iran." Nothing came of that. He totally got away with it. They just sat there and took it, and that was the end of it. When he
Right.
killed Qasem Soleimani in Syria during his first term, nothing came of it. No, there was no major upheaval. So I think he deserves a little bit of not to say like let him off the hook with anything. Like if he nukes Moscow tomorrow, that we go here, look, let him cook. Let's see what he's working on. Like clearly, there's a limit to everything, but he has proven himself capable of one quick, decisive military action and then stopping. It doesn't always have to turn into a multi-decade shit
But
show,
I
as we've
I
seen with
would say there's a
previous things.
big, and this is where the kind of nation building aspect comes back in. I would say there's a big difference between bombing military facilities, as was the case in Iran, and certainly targeting Qasem Soleimani, who was, yeah, a very senior figure in the military, but certainly not, the supreme leader or the Iranian president or anything like this, which was almost certainly would have been more likely to initiate a power struggle. Not guaranteed, because clearly Israel did take out senior Iranian leadership in the hostilities last year. But nevertheless, I think that what they did in Venezuela is very different, and a lot of it remains up in the air. And I will reiterate, there's clearly good come out of this. A lot of Venezuelans are very happy about this. A lot of Venezuelans are really thankful to the US for doing it. I just think that there are a lot of, it doesn't matter that they will say this is about, they'll be direct and say this is about the oil, rather than saying this is about something genuinely prideful, like nation building or making Venezuela a better country. Although I do think I did see some people saying make Venezuela great again in the aftermath of it. But I just think that, yeah, again, and people do get, I'm increasingly seeing this these days in commentary, certainly on social media, but also in terms of conversations with people. People get very annoyed with you for having any kind of sort of moral aspirations whatsoever. They do get annoyed if you sort of, yeah, rain on the sort of might is right parade, put it that way, which again, that logic holds in this world. The US can't do things like this, and it's very unlikely they're going to suffer any direct consequences immediately because of it. But nevertheless, as I said at the beginning, now they're talking about Greenland, and Greenland is a completely different situation to
Well,
Venezuela.
does anybody seriously think that America is going to invade and seize Greenland? Like, obviously, they would like it. Obviously, they are going to. Denmark is clearly unhappy about them indicating that they would like to absorb Greenland, but clearly that's going to be, if it happens at all, it's going to be done by referendum or by, like, does anybody actually envisage them invading a fellow NATO member
I
state's territory
I
and
don't
just
share
taking Greenland?
I don't share your certainty about that, because I think Trump has clearly shown at this stage that he has to be taken at his word when it comes to things like this. Certainly, you have to take him at his word when it came to Iran. You have to take him at his word when it came to Venezuela. And again, aside from the oil after Venezuela, the other thing he's been talking a lot about, and indeed last night I saw some of it on X this morning, is him talking about Greenland and about how it's essential to their national security, which again is some of the argument that was made for Venezuela as well. So I do think that even the introduction of uncertainty like that, like, you're right, it's a NATO ally. Now, I will say, if you were to do that, the Europeans can be as unhappy as they want. They can't do jack shit about it. And I do think this is, I think Ireland should maintain its neutrality, but I think Europe as a whole, certainly countries that do have, reasons for military alliances, like Poland, and indeed I understand the background to NATO and things like that, although a lot of people disagree with me. I do think it would make sense for these countries to gain some capability so that they're not dependent on America's goodwill when it comes to security and defense. And if America decides one day, okay, we're actually going to take Greenland, is it really the case Europe can't do anything about that? And again, we've spoken about it on the podcast so many times. I really, really dislike the European bureaucracy intensely. So I think they are the definition of the moral postures about the international rules-based orders. I mean, they were all posting about monitoring the situation in Venezuela and things like this. And everyone's like, okay, well, all right, you do that. It literally doesn't matter. And I do think that's the real failure of the sort of international rules-based order. The people will say these things because it gives them some kind of moral credit or something like this.
Sorry to interrupt you, but like on the whole international rules based order and might makes right and all that, like you, I'm a Catholic. I don't agree that might makes right. I don't believe that, big powers should just throw their weight around and use their strength to dominate weaker countries just because they can. I don't think that that's a good thing. I'm not even conceding, by the way, that that's what happened with Venezuela, but I'm just saying in general terms, I don't think that's right. But I think we're increasingly coming to the point where the whole lie and the myth of international law divorced from any kind of religious framework is being exposed for the absurdity that it is. Because as we know, as you should know, anybody who's thought about this deeply for more than 5 minutes realizes that human rights mean nothing in the absence of religion. Like what does it mean when you have these secular states that say you can't just invade another country and take over their resources and violate their sovereignty? Why not? Who says? Who's going to stop me? You? Like,
Yeah.
as a Christian, I can make an argument that for why that's wrong. I have a higher authority that I can appeal to, namely God. Well, who do you have? The UN? What's that? a load of corrupt officials sitting around in a room somewhere. Like, all the UN Charter of Human Rights is, from a secular perspective, is it's a wish list that a load of unelected people wrote up and said, we would like it if this was the case. If I'm China or Russia or the president of the United States, what do I care what you would like? I would like to seize this country's oil. So who's going to stop me? I'm going to do it. And your list might as well be toilet paper. So again, I'm not saying that's my position. It's not. I believe that countries have a right to sovereignty. I believe that individuals have a right to sovereignty. But I think that these secular leaders who are horrified by things like this are quickly realizing that unless you have religion or lots and lots of guns, your rights, quote unquote, mean nothing at all.
Yeah.
It's just all that matters is what you can enforce, and they can't enforce anything, so they have nothing.
No, I know the response will always come up to that argument that, in the more religious times, there was still plenty of wars and things like that, but a lot of that was down to, I think if we shared a common framework that acknowledged these things, that would obviously be to the benefit of the international community. But this is also where, this is a different topic and a much bigger conversation, that I do see sort of secularity being stamped all over this, because the religious perspective would be that, well, whether there's any consequences suffered now, you will have to answer for that decision at some point in the future, and you have to be certain that what you did was morally right, not just whether it was strategically right for the US. But as I said, that's a whole nother conversation. But I would just say on this that, yeah, Maduro, in my opinion, not a good guy. I see a lot of happy Venezuelans, and I know you have people counter posting saying, oh, here's a rally in Venezuela showing people who want Maduro released back to them. I think the weight of the evidence is in the opposite direction. I see far more people celebrating history, and it also makes sense. People knock it because it's diaspora celebrating. I mean, if conditions were so bad in Venezuela that you decided to emigrate, you absolutely have a valid right to celebrate the overthrow of the guy who was responsible for that. But I do, as I say, even acknowledging the sort of strategic advantages it probably confers on the US, find it very hard to be really gung-ho enthusiastic in the way that a lot of people are, because it's so early on. We've seen things like this before that haven't worked out well, whatever the sort of stated intention behind the action. And I do think that, again, leaving aside the sort of strategic value of the move, or the sort of fact that America can do this and no one's able to do anything about it. On the oil point, like, say America was moral even in terms of going after Maduro. On the oil point, it's a basic yes, America invested a lot in terms of, as I understand it, in the beginning, developing Venezuela's oil industry and things like that. It remains the case that that was in Venezuela's possession. Just because they didn't like what Maduro was doing with it doesn't change the fact that I would say morally speaking, you can't just go take it. It's in the same way that, like, if my neighbor's dog is barking non-stop in the living room in the apartment beside ours, I can't just march in and take the dog out of there and I know release him off into the street. I know nations and people have different rights and responsibilities and things like that, but I think this is one that is properly about sovereignty and that there are some major question marks over in this regard.
Well, like, if the police apprehend a criminal, let's say, like an organized mob figure, more organized crime mob figure, they seize his property. You know, like, he forfeits his cars and his watches and his everything, his houses, even in some cases. Like, so again, I'm not saying I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here. I'm just trying to
Yeah,
present
yeah,
like
no,
what
it's
an
good. I think it's made for a good debate.
what an American would say is that there's nothing unjust about when you apprehend the leader of a hostile regime, that you take his stuff. That's kind of within the purview of justice and reasonable, proportional. Like, blowing up half of Venezuela and killing like 1 million people, that's disproportionate. Taking his
Yeah.
stuff after he's done tangible harm to our country, there's nothing wrong with that. That's
But, like,
perfectly normal.
is the oil industry his, or is it, ultimately for Venezuela's common good and therefore for the
Well, yeah,
people of Venezuela?
that's a fair retort.
Yeah, but again, this is super complicated, and I'm always so uncomfortable with people who have ready-made, oh, brilliant, well done, America, when it's so early on, or on the opposite side, people who are like, this is universally terrible and there was no good can come out of it. It's like, of course there could be some good come out of it. A bad guy could have been taken out and things might go well.
And also, there were a lot of people, mainly on the left. In fairness, a lot of the critics on the right are coming at it from a more reasonable perspective. But a lot of people on the left, they actually just hate the West and America, and will always side with America's and the West's adversaries, no matter what. Who it doesn't matter who it is, what the reason is. They hate the Western world. So there is a lot of that too, where literally it wouldn't matter what happened. People are just always going to take the other side.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I agree. But I think
So
we've gone halfway through the episode on this topic. We have 2 more to get through.
Yeah, I suppose we might hop over. Would you like to lead us into the next topic, talking about the incoming unfathomable levels of congestion that we're going to be seeing within the dirty Dublin locality?
So I understand this morning that the next stage in the Dublin City traffic plan is set to be implemented. So I'll read a little bit from the Irish Times report on it here. Whereas the headline, wider cycle lanes and road space for cars to be reduced under next stage of Dublin's traffic plan. So obviously there's less space for cars, more space for bikes. And it's the subheading, cycle routes and traffic calming will be expanded as the redesign of the city centre continues. I'll just read a little bit. Quoting, new Dublin traffic interventions resulting in improvements for cyclists and a reduction in road space for cars will be implemented this year in the next phase of the Dublin City Transport Plan. A two-way cycle path will be installed on Gardiner Street and the number of its traffic lanes will be halved. Moreover, the Clontarf to city centre cycle route will be extended from Amiens Street to the Quays as part of the traffic calming plan. The long-awaited planning application for the College Green Plaza and changes to the use of loading bays are also expected to be made this year. And some background, the 2023 plan envisaged the reallocation of road space from cars to public transport, cyclists and pedestrians, while still retaining access to the city centre and its car parks for private motorists. So the bottom line there is, yeah, less space for cars, more space for cyclists. And I think that there will be a lot of annoyance about this because a lot of people say Dublin's an absolutely horrendous city to drive in. Then you obviously have the cyclist camp who are in favor of it, and that's with everything. I was trying to think that I was going to say I want to become someone of less nuance because it'd be easier to have like one hot take on everything. But I do think that I was in Dublin a number of times the city centre over the past couple of weeks. And I thought it was actually a really pleasant city. Now, I will preface that by saying, obviously, as our viewers know, I don't live in Ireland now. I do come back. I think people might not understand how often I come back. I come back 2 or 3 times a year for multiple weeks at a time. Some of our trips 3, 4 weeks long. So any given year, we might be over in Ireland for a third of the year or at least a quarter of the year or so. And I live in Dublin, so I have a lot of experience of it. It's where I grew up. And so I do think that I found Dublin really pleasant over the course of the time I was there recently. And it strikes me as an increasingly accessible city and an increasingly, obviously the crime is the major issue in my opinion. I literally just looking last night, people taking pictures on social media and posting them of like 14-year-olds drug dealing on the north side of the city, things like that. A major problem. But in terms of like a lot of the infrastructural things, it is pleasant from a pedestrian and a public transport user, as we are when we're there, perspective. But on the flip side, you have like the report there 2 or 3 weeks ago that Dublin's the 11th worst city in the world, was it, for traffic congestion? I don't think it was Europe, I think it was the world. And things like that certainly don't help this. And it's very much the case that Irish streets are getting more crowded with cars, and this is coming to reduce the space they have in the capital city to move. So again, you might say this is sort of aspirational, but it's ultimately going to be very detrimental to, the vast majority of the population who drive and have to drive.
Yeah, I saw one of the main ringleaders behind this plan bragging that, there was a little bit of initial upset over the traffic plans, but we've actually not got many complaints anymore. Like it's really almost nobody is complaining. So that kind of shows that there's a widespread acceptance of this. That doesn't indicate anything of the sort. People could be infuriated about something and not like, what is emailing you at this stage going to do? You're well into the plan. It's already being implemented. What am I going to waste my time sending you an angry email or a letter or ringing you? Like, there's no point. So the mere fact that people are not inundating you with infuriated emails kind of more shows that they have been beaten down and demoralized more than it means that they are really enthusiastic about your plan. We know how often...
Just because people don't get back with their criticism doesn't mean everyone's delighted about it.
Yeah, and I mean, they say the same about the deposit return scheme where they go, oh, people are using it, so clearly that means people like it. No, it means I don't want to give you bastards an extra €8 of my money every month. Like there's the fact that I am begrudgingly complying with your revolting policy is not an endorsement of said policy. So yeah, I think really the anti-car crusade was always attributed to Eamon Ryan and his cohort, and there was an assumption that once the government is degreened, which happened at the last general election, that all of this stuff is going to go out the window. I don't think people realize the extent to which it is ingrained in the fabric of all Irish political parties, all state agencies, and everybody in officialdom, that it really is persistent long beyond. I mean, the annihilation of the Green Party was one of the most decisive elements of the general election just gone.
Yeah.
That was the if there was a clear message to come out of that election, because the votes kind of went everywhere, that will be it. Is we want less of the green stuff, and yet here we are. People never seem to get what they want, even when they vote in very unambiguous terms in this country.
Well, so the Greens were kind of akin to political kamikaze fighters because they went in with a mission. They were like, okay, we're going to push this agenda as far as we can while sort of, we have public favor on it. And they did that. they very much did that, and as you say, got it ingrained to the degree that even when they're out of government, it sort of continues apace. And I think that, in terms of sort of their sheer adherence to their belief, that's something going for them. They clearly really believe it in a way that very few politicians really believe in what they are saying, and I think that is, paradoxically, they're to be credited with that, even though I said a lot of their policies have absolutely disastrous implications. But I think that the whole difficulty, and we've spoken about this on the podcast before. I used to be probably like many of us on the right, sort of very reactionary, sort of left things. And there's some things that I am still, that's still the case. Some things that I sort of broke no argument on, like abortion. That's one of the big ones. But there are other things that I would concede that if their instincts and solutions are wrong, no, if their solutions are wrong, their instincts that there's a problem are at least decent. Like we spoke before about how I think environmentalism is generally ceded to the left, and generally ceded to green types and things like that, including things like reforestation and rewilding. And those are obviously good things and beneficial for Ireland and for Ireland's heritage. I think when it comes to sort of the transport infrastructure issue, though, it's just way too ambitious. We keep trying to do really ambitious things to get rid of car use when public transport is woeful around the country. I mean, there were a lot of Green Party members kicking up stink just a couple of weeks back about the government axing plans for certain rail routes around the country. They had those in the National Transport Plan, and then they axed them out. And you think, if you're going to be making big sort of sweeping driving changes, you have to be equally sweeping with public transport measures. I think an example of something to say that I'm thankful to Eamon Ryan for, things I never thought I'd say. We went down to Howth on the Dart there a week or two ago, and when I tagged my Leap card on, it took €6, and I was like, what the hell? And when we got off, I tagged it again, and I got €4 put back onto it. So it was only €2 all the way out to Howth, whereas before, I'm not sure what it would have cost you before, but it sure as hell would have been more expensive than that. I think things like that are to be commended, but yeah, like reducing road lanes in an already congested city centre, it's not in the same ballpark, to use the phrase. It seems short-sighted and idealistic in a way that naturally is going to annoy a lot of people, and understandably turn them away from kind of environmentalism more broadly. But the last thing I was going to say just on this is that another thing I've noticed this for years now, and this is more to do with county councils, although obviously the Dublin City Traffic Plan has to do with the county council. I think they're a huge issue. This isn't even environmental related. Is the number of traffic lights and road signs. It is genuinely ridiculous. On the Ballyogan Road, for example, which is near where my parents live, where we always stay, there's honest to God a traffic light. Once you get to a certain section of it, every 10, 20 meters or something like this. There are road signs everywhere. They have these plastic bollards they put up to sort of protect no drive areas and protect cycle lanes that are hideous. And I think that, there are a whole load of changes that have been made to the city's transport infrastructure.
And that would be, sorry to interrupt, but like that would be
Yeah.
one thing if we had a really low rate of deaths and we were super safe when it comes to road safety, but we aren't. And you're seeing that number, I don't know where we stand internationally, but it's definitely worse than it was several years ago as far as road fatalities goes. So
Yeah.
it's like all the worst of all possible worlds, where you have the ultra caution and carpet bombing the place in irritating signs and speed limits and so on, and also people are dying left, right, and center. So what is even the point of this? Like,
Because this is the thing. I mean, they're talking about, obviously they're reducing speed limits for, I imagine, both environmental and safety reasons. At least those are the reasons that they would give. Nevertheless, 2025 was, I would need to look it up. It was certainly one of the worst years in recent memory for road deaths. And I do think internationally compared, we were either the top country, the second top country. We're really bad, at least as far as the EU is concerned, in terms of our trend upwards of road deaths. So I do think, anyway, there are much more. Obviously, governments and county councils can focus on many things at the same time. But I do think, pros Dublin is really, in my opinion, and this obviously I think even the statement is going to be unpopular, more pleasant to walk around than it was even a year ago. I'll put it that way. And that public transport has benefited in some ways, but they're a long way off being able to do things like reduce road space in the city centre. I think that uh, just too many people rely on cars, and of course they need them. I mean, when we're back, we're only either going to the city centre or going somewhere accessible. When I lived in Dublin, there are some parts of the city that it would genuinely take me hours to get to. If I wasn't driving, I'd have to walk to the Lewis, which was a 15-minute walk from where I lived. The Lewis was about generally I would have to go into town to get a connection to if I didn't want it to be too complicated to go where I wanted to go, which is about 50 minutes from my stop. I would have to walk in town to a bus thing, and the buses, as we all know, don't come particularly frequently, and get a bus another 40 minutes or so, say, if I wanted to get to wherever. And I think, obviously, when people are facing a vista like that, they're going to opt for driving, even if they have to sit in traffic because they don't have to get out if it's wet and rainy and cold, as it often is. And these are much more fundamental issues they ought to resolve if they want to get people out of cars and into public transport.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just a and look, I'm not even gonna say this because it's so controversial. I don't want to get absolutely beheaded, so I'm not gonna. I'll just allude to it that the level of obsession, I suppose, with cycling is really something I do not understand. Like, cycling is absolutely fine. It's a fine mode of transportation, but the cycling lobby has more power than I think a lot of people would expect. Like, it's kind of bizarre. Big bicycle. I don't know what you call it. That that
It's
faction.
just that sort of. I saw a really funny video a couple of months back of there was someone going really slow on a skateboard in a cycle lane, and there was an abundance of time for the cyclists to avoid them. They were the skateboarder was here. They were crossing a road or something like this, and the cycle lane kind of wide, and the cyclist set a course for the skateboarder. They could have gone around. There was loads of space, and they made a beeline for the skateboarder. And then they sort of tapped into the skateboarder and fell over and proceeded to berate the skateboarder and go on at them about how this is a cycle lane. You have to get out of the way. And I think there's something to that. It's like cyclists, because they're on the offensive at the moment. And I like cycling. My wife and I do way more cycling than we do well, not way more cycling in the winter, but we do a lot of cycling in the summer, and we like getting around that way. And we have kind of seats for the kids on the back and things like that. I do appreciate I'm coming across like a real lefty in this one, but anyway, nevertheless, I do think the cyclists, because they're on the offensive at the moment, really advance their agenda by being as obnoxious as possible in terms of their engagement with other people, so that for other people it's not worth resisting them or it's not worth engaging with them. But I do think that, yeah, nevertheless, just because they're obnoxious, they shouldn't get what they want, and they clearly are at the moment.
Yeah, cycling is fine. Being a cyclist, I don't know, like identifying as a cyclist, that's where I
Yeah,
start to get off.
that's unfathomable. That's unfathomable to me when people are, posting on X and social media about, different models of lock and child carrier for the bike and things like that. It's like, give Google, bro. Google it and
Yeah.
figure it out.
And look, I believe in equality too. I feel the same way about cars, frankly. This is where the crowd turns. This is where I lose my audience. But I've never been a huge car guy. Like, when you see people just posting incessantly about their cars and the kind of car they have and their dream car and supercars, and don't get that either. So I'm an equal opportunity judger of other people's passions, I guess. I don't know. But
Transport, at least your go-to line whenever people talk about cars is I like Toyota.
yeah, yeah. I like those Flintstone cars where you have to pedal it with your feet. That's my go-to. But
Well, to be fair, like electric cars, and this completely divorced from the topic, aren't paradoxically too dissimilar from the Flintstone cars, because a friend of ours has a Tesla, and it's amazing. It's like a glorified go-kart. I mean, I know all automatic cars are, you just got the acceleration and the brake, and then you've got obviously your few drive, reverse, parking options, but there's something about the Tesla, and I'm sure it probably applies to other electric cars as well, that is really kind of rudimentary. And as I say, just the word that keeps coming to mind for them is like a go-kart. So yeah, I don't know. Not much to be drawn from that, but it's just an observation.
They need to come back to me. I'm not interested until they add nitrous, like in Need for Speed, where you can hit a button and just like do a
Flames come out of the back.
yeah. That's when we're really doing something innovative. But
What if they
with
put
that
that on the back
said,
of a bike
yeah, now again, better again. Now we're really cooking with gas.
and it captured like CO2 out of the air or something?
With that said, I thought we might move on to we try to talk about some cultural topics always to offset the relentless politics, and something that you were talking about this morning was the abysmal state of children's books, and I couldn't agree more. I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you wanted to lead us into that.
Yeah, so my anecdote for this, because this is not going to be a stats-based segment, is that my wife and I were obviously doing a bit of Santa shopping, and I really hope that my son doesn't watch this episode before he before his disbelief in Santa fails or comes. But we were having a look at books. We went to a couple of bookshops, and I came to the conclusion that the children's books industry is absolutely woeful. And this isn't a culture wars thing of the moral messages inside are useless, or I disagree with this or that aspect. It's really the case of just the vast majority of the children's books on the shelves are absolute nonsense. Really and truly nonsense. It's like you've got books about the giraffe who wore human pants. You've got books about I can't remember the name of it. There was one that just really took my breath away. It was something about I'm kind of paraphrasing the name, but it was something like Jimmy Goes to Dino Loop Land or something like this, where the dinosaurs were all in some sort of bizarre shapes. And I thought, this is pure nonsense, and there's no reason kids' books have to be like this.
No.
I'm all for letting kids be kids. My wife and I think childhood is a beautiful thing, and we hope we're enabling that for our son. But I do think there's a certain tendency to infantilize adults as well, but certainly kids, because children's books didn't always used to be this way. A lot of people I know say read their children old children's books, and these go back some way in some cases, like Aesop's Fables. The Hobbit was obviously written as a children's book, and that was obviously written for slightly older children than my son, but not that much older, because a lot of the books as well that are for kids older than my own, so like 5, 6, 7, 8, are also nonsense. And I read a lot of these as a kid myself, like Captain Underpants and things like that. I read like all of those when I was a kid, and I enjoyed them, and it was fine. But it's kind of like they're not beautiful, and I feel like this is a sort of broader issue our generation has with the generation that came before, which they were sort of very unthinking about what they were exposing themselves and their kids to, whereas our generation is a lot more aware of what our kids are watching and consuming, because we've grown up consuming those things as well. And I think your child would be so much better off if they read something of quality that's been around for ages because it's good and because it's worth reading, than reading like Floop's Fooglies or whatever the hell they've got on the Easton's bookshelf or whatever shop you happen to be in. Another point before I let you in, because I know you have a lot of thoughts on this as well, is that even the books that like really corner the children's market are not great. Like some of them are, like for example, my wife and I quite like the Peter Rabbit series. We think those books are quite beautiful, and they're fine. They're not silly. They're generally, following these rabbits that are like children and what they're up to around the home, and that's, absolutely fine. But you've got one of the most popular children's authors is Julia Donaldson. She wrote the Axel Scheffler, I think is the name of the illustrator, who wrote the Gruffalo. And they've wrote a whole load of books with the same kind of art style, different stories, different angles and things like that. But these have so dominated. Like, these books take up a huge amount of the shelves in most kids' bookshops. So we live in Poland. These are all over the shelves here. They're all over the shelves in Ireland. I presume it's the same pretty much everywhere else. And these books, again, are like fine at best. It's like, we have one by them, which we read with our son, but my wife and I don't particularly like it. It's, what's it called? The kindest giant in town or something like that. And it's about a giant who wears a sort of old patchwork robe and gown, and he decides to buy a nice set of clothes. And as he walks through the town, he comes across other animals in need, and he progressively gives away his clothes to all of these animals. And it's got sort of rhyming, and it stacks up so that initially he gives away his tie as a scarf for a giraffe. Then he gives away his shirt as a sailboat for for a sail on a goat's boat, and it all stacks up progressively. And it's like, this is just fine. You're reading and you just don't feel anything. You don't think this is beautiful. You don't think anything's really being conveyed beyond just kind of silliness. And I know people will hear this and they go, "Oh my god, what a pair of bores." But I do think that, again, we spoke about this with the Santa topic that we did in the episode before Christmas, that it is not a flaw to apply thought to things that people have been taking for granted for decades now. I think that it's actually a good thing for people to question the quality of the books their kids are reading. And indeed, if they do so, maybe someone with real artistic and authorial talent will come along and write something decent with some beautiful artwork. And then that's a better thing for your kids to be reading than what's out there at the moment. But yeah, I do think that there is a bit of a crisis in kids' books at the moment, and it's kind of got away because people think, well, this is what kids' books are supposed to be, just sort of mindless nonsense.
Yeah, I don't want to put anybody on blast, so I won't name who they were, but lots of people, my son is 2, and lots of people got him presents for Christmas, obviously relatives and so on. And so he got a couple of books that uh, were these sorts of normie books that you just find on the shelf, just sort of bought thoughtlessly. Again, no, I don't want to be too harsh, because like if people are getting your kid gifts, obviously I'm greatly appreciative of that. But anyway, I was taking a look at them, and exactly as you say, it's just so nihilistic and meaningless. Like they're just nonsense books that don't have any. You see, I don't need them to have a really deep message. I don't need
They're
it to
kids
be.
after all, yeah.
Yeah, it's a children's book. It doesn't need to be that sophisticated or interesting, but it's just gibberish, And I'm extremely invested in my son. So like I put him to bed every night. My wife takes care of him most of the days. I take care of him in the evening. I give him a bath, I brush his teeth, and then I put him down to bed. And I always tell him a story in bed, a couple of stories, and then I leave him. But part of the kind of social interaction between me and him is the story. And so if the story is not agonizing for me to read as the parent, that makes it better. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, it's not going to be some riveting book that I am getting. Like, it's not the kind of book that I would read on my own in bed. I'll put it that
Yeah.
way. But as long as it's not painful, then I'm more likely to want to do it with him on an ongoing basis. So, like I've read a lot about this, and this is actually a really interesting subject. Why do certain children's books endure for centuries, like Aesop's fables and the Brothers Grimm stories and things like that? Like, why are they so resonant with children throughout different cultures and time
Mm-hmm.
periods and countries? And there's certain themes that have great psychological significance for children, even if they don't understand it, and even if you don't really understand it as the parent. So, for example, lots of children's stories feature giants and the protagonist outwitting a giant, this kind of thing. Children live in a world of giants. They're a little person
Mm-hmm.
surrounded by very big people. And often, as anybody who has kids knows, there's a conflict of wills. Mommy and daddy want me to do this. I don't want to do that. Or they're trying to stop me from doing something that I want to do, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. So if you tell your children a story about a little person tricking a big person and getting one over on them, even if they don't fully understand it, that they like that because it gives them a kind of a thrill. It's exhilarating. It makes them feel like, oh wow, on some level, it's almost like, wow, mommy couldn't want me to eat my dinner, and I managed to trick her into thinking I ate it and I didn't, and I got away with it. So uh, there's like a little psychological drama playing out, and these stories. That's just one example. There's many other examples like that. These stories help them to understand where they fit into the world. And that's something that I've heard as well, which is very tedious as a parent, because kids are so repetitive. They want to do the same thing again and again and again and again, which is really head
Yeah.
wrecking. But I've heard that the general view psychologically is that if your child wants to hear the same story 500 times, you should tell it to them 500 times, because they're working something out in their head. It's good for them, basically. The reason they're asking for it is because it's doing something to them
Mhm.
psychologically that they find helpful, and so it's
It is,
almost
yeah.
therapeutic in a way, or something like that.
I mean, I'm
So
not gonna advance my own sort of like whack job. I don't really have a whack job theory on this one, but I'm not gonna advance my own sort of not hashed out theories as to what's going on. But I do generally find my son bores of the stories that aren't great anyway. Whereas
yeah,
he's more interested in the quality ones. My parents got him some beautiful books over Christmas. One of which was Christmas Carol. It was really beautifully illustrated, and really sort of well written as far as kids' books go. And it was a real I enjoyed reading it. My wife and I both enjoyed reading it, and he enjoyed reading it as well, and he wanted to read it multiple times in a row. And I thought, there's no reason all kids' books couldn't be of this quality without some effort. But the
yeah.
thing is, once you start making a living this way, I guess, it's so much easier, I guess, to come up with ideas if your stories are, yeah, the word I would use is nonsense. A lot of these stories are pure nonsense. They don't, and it's not like, as you said, we have to be conveying, the essence of God or the deepest meaning to it. They are children, but I find that children are always sort of capable for better things than adults are sort of inclined to think they are, especially today.
And
Because
and
people,
sorry to interrupt, but also injecting a little bit more peril into stories. Like, a lot of times, because we want to insulate kids, we want to protect kids, you want to preserve their innocence. So obviously we all agree with that and understand that. I think people take that too far, where the crisis or the problem that needs to be resolved in the story is something so low stakes that no one could possibly care about it, including a child. It's like, oh, the cat couldn't find his socks. Let's try and find his socks. And we searched all over the house, and
yeah,
oh, we finally found it. It was under the couch. That sucks. Like, add a little bit of danger. Like, don't tell him a horror story that's going to leave him in cold sweats in the night, but being chased by a lion, or like, these sorts of things is okay. And not only is it okay, I would argue it's helpful in that it allows them to confront something that's a little bit scary in a controlled environment, where
yeah,
they're not literally in a state of terror, where they can imagine, oh wow, what if I was being chased by a whatever, and that it
yeah.
helps them to become more resilient, I would say.
No, I agree 100%. So I think the takeaway from this is that there's a real gap in the market for quality children's books. And it's like Tolkien did, and even, the Thomas Tank Engine stories, not as profound as Aesop's Fables or anything like that, but they're at least coherent, and they're kind of pleasant, especially the older books that were written by, what was it, Reverend Audrey or something like that. But a lot of these books came from parents writing stories for their kids, I guess because they thought they could do a better job than a lot of the authors were doing. And I do think we live in a moment where, yeah, literate, um, talented parents who can write, and indeed talented parents who can illustrate, ought to consider turning their hand at putting together a children's book, because it's bad out there. We really saw that over Christmas. We were scanning the shelves, and we were finding very little that we'd be happy for our son to read, or even for us to read repeatedly. And it's not to say that, if someone gets us a gift of a book we don't particularly like, we're not going to read it to them, and that we're sort of pharisaical about the thing. But it is to say that it's something worth noting, because I think it's bad, and I think it's only going to get worse if people don't think about it.
Yeah, this is slightly unrelated, but just as a sort of a, it's within the same ballpark. I saw a thread on
Mhm.
Twitter, and it was some guy saying basically that, am I a bad person because I really don't like spending time with my kids?
I
Like,
saw that
after,
one.
he was like, I love my children, But after 10 minutes, I just start getting angry and impatient, and I just want to go do something else. And then he got a fair amount of criticism, but there were also a lot of guys being like, "No, brother, like that's completely normal. This is the way it's always been through history and all this kind of thing." And I don't
Yeah,
want to
dads aren't
be,
supposed to be second mothers. They were saying things like that.
yeah, exactly, and I don't want to be, I don't want to just lie. I would say it is true that my wife has a higher tolerance for very, very prolonged exposure to children than I do. And I think that's kind of normal. You know what I mean? Like, I think if I was
Mhm.
to spend 24 hours with him and she was to spend 24 hours with him, I would probably lose my temper a little bit more than she would at certain things, and that's not a good thing. I'm not saying that that's right. And I'm not saying, by the way, that I would freak out and start punching holes in the wall. I don't mean that either. But I just mean, like, I think men do get a little bit more irritable. But with that said, if you cannot spend 10 minutes with your son
Mhm.
without, like, flying into a rage, there's something wrong with you. Like, that is not normal. And you should be ashamed of that, frankly, and be like, I need to fix this. And one of the ways you fix that is, like with any other, your relationship with your child is like any relationship with any other person, where let's say your wife likes some show that you just think is utter crap, that you cannot stand watching. You're gonna say, here, I don't mind you watching that show, but when we're together, can we watch something else? Can we find something that we both like to do and do that? And then we all have fun. So similarly, obviously there are books that I don't really want to read my son because I find them annoying or tedious or whatever. So then you find a story that you can tell him that you don't find tedious, that he still likes, and then you're both happy. Or like if
Mhm.
he and I are playing, I would much prefer to play with like Lego and blocks, because then he obviously enjoys that because he's a child. And no matter what age you are, if you're 99, you can build a little tower or a thing, and it's at least a little bit stimulating for you.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, you can always find something that you can do with your kids that is mutually enjoyable to a certain extent, to the point where it's tolerable. But yeah, the idea that you're just like, no, it really infuriates me to have to like play with my children. And the other thing, and I'm not speaking from experience here because I've only got one toddler, so I don't know what it's like later. But I have it on good authority that children grow up, and that by the time your kid gets to the age of like 8, he's never gonna ask you to play again. So don't worry about that. If you don't like hanging out with your kids, you will not have to worry about that for the foreseeable future within a couple of years, and then you'll be ruining the day that you didn't get down on your knees and play with some Lego. But anyway,
Yeah, I'd hope my son will still want to play when I'm 8, but I do know, yeah, my wife and I often comment on the fact that the day will come when our son, we hope we manage to raise him such that he, always has time for us. We just know how it is that kids are like that, teenagers especially are like that, that their peer group kind of take precedence over their parents. So anyway, not to end on too depressing a note.
yeah, absolutely. Me coming in with the high energy opening and then ending on
Your
the
son won't want to
suicide
play
and
with you anymore.
yeah, the death inducing ending there. So with that said, we're delighted to be back. Thank you all for returning for another episode and another year of
Yeah,
the Long Game Podcast. God bless.
God bless.